What's up, Ragin Nation? My name is Alex. You're watching the Ragin Ronin review. Last Friday, I was at the opening night of Total Recall. Total Recall is a remake of a movie of the same name, which came out in 1990, originally directed by Paul Verhoeven, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sharon Stone, and Michael Ironside. In this new version, it is directed by Len Wiseman, starring Colin Farrell, Kate Beckinsale, Jessica Biel, Bill Nighy, Bryan Cranston, and Bokeem Woodbine. When I first heard about Sony Pictures wanting to remake Total Recall, I was actually pretty excited, as long as they keep the original story concept, which is absolutely brilliant, and update it with today's visual effects. You can have a pretty badass movie. The stories, the characters, and Paul Verhoeven's visceral direction made the 1990 original a sci-fi classic. The concept behind these movies is that the main character really feels that his life is really mundane, and it's day in, day out. Everything's just the same, and it's very boring to him, and he wants a bit of a change, so he visits this place called Recall. It's a company that sells you memories. If your life is boring, they can implant memories into your head, and then it feels like you have done something amazing in the past. They can inject some really over-the-top memories, or rather life experiences. That's the general concept of Total Recall in both the original and the remake. However, the original dealt with Mars and Martians. The new version does not deal with Martians, nor does it take place on Mars. In this new remake version, it's the 21st century, and most of the Earth is unlivable because of the lasting effects of chemical warfare, and therefore there are only two colonies left over, and that is the colony, which is actually Australia, and then the United Federation of Great Britain, which is this big area in the western tip of Europe. As I was watching the movie, I felt that the concept that they have for the setting is actually quite interesting. The United Federation of Great Britain is actually the equivalent of Earth in the original, and the colony is actually the equivalent of Mars in the original. Now, I thought that was pretty unique because they weren't going to involve Mars and Martians in the remake version. But as the movie progressed towards the third act, let me tell you, that is where having the movie dealing with Martians actually would have been better. But let me tell you what is cool about this movie. The visuals. When I said that they were going to take the original concept and update it with today's visual effects, they went all out on this one. The action is totally non-stop. It goes from a shootout to a foot chase to hand-to-hand fighting to a rooftop chase to a car chase to an elevator chase and more hand-to-hand fighting and more shootouts. So it just doesn't stop. The first and second act are very, very exciting. And you kind of expect this because we're dealing with Kate Beckinsale, who has a lot of experience in these action roles, especially with these underworld movies. And Len Wiseman's last movie, Live Free or Die Hard, was also an action-packed ride, so you can really expect more of the same in this movie. A lot of the action in the movie is very drawn out. Like, it's entertaining, but it lasts a very long time. The rooftop chase just keeps on going. You think that the hand-to-hand fights are gonna stop, but they continue. And then you have this car chase, which is so dynamic because it feels a lot like, and even better than the futuristic car chase that took place in Minority Report. And I gotta say that Len Wiseman has a really good understanding of action sense. He really knows how to keep the audiences engaged by stimulating our senses with these action-packed visuals. And when I say the visuals are awesome, I also mean the cinematography and the set design, because they just totally went all out with the look of the film. You have vertical cities. You have cities that are like on the ceiling. You have reverse highways where the cars actually float underneath the highways. The whole concept of how these mega cities look is just absolutely breathtaking. But after all the action and all the cool visual effects, the movie really doesn't have a whole lot to offer. Now, you're probably thinking, wait a minute. This movie is actually a remake of a movie which already has a brilliant story. So why would this movie also excel in that department? The thing is that Len Wiseman decided to change things up a bit. Like I said before, he didn't want to deal with Mars and Martians, and unfortunately by doing that, you ditch a huge part of what made the original unique, and that is where this movie fails. One thing that Len Wiseman didn't do too well with regards to the characters is developing them. Now, you have Colin Farrell as Douglas Quaid. He develops him just enough so that you care for him just enough. And it really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the acting. It's just that I just wasn't feel convinced enough that he wanted that much change in his life. And you know what? I think one part of it had to do with the fact that the whole recall process, you know, the scene where he actually goes into the recall business and inquires about these memory implants, I felt that that entire scene was just rushed. In the original, the recall process was a two-step process. In the remake, it was like half a step. They just rushed right into it, and I think that's one of the main reasons why I didn't feel a whole lot for the protagonist. And you know what? A lot of the characters are quite weak in this movie. Jessica Biel. I originally thought that Jessica Biel and Kate Beckinsale were gonna do a whole lot of damage in this movie. They had a bit of a fight scene, but really I didn't feel the chemistry between Jessica Biel and any character that she was on the same screen with. I didn't feel any chemistry between Colin Farrell and Jessica Biel together, and I also didn't feel the physical chemistry between Kate Beckinsale and Jessica Biel when they were fighting. They just made Jessica Biel's character really weak. Rachel Ticotin still plays a better Melina. And then you have Cohagen, who was originally played by Ronnie Cox, and let me tell you, Bryan Cranston as Cohagen is nowhere near as evil as the way Ronnie Cox played him. Bill Nighy, I think he did all he could, but he was limited to what he could do because he played Matthias in this remake, and as I already mentioned, the remake has nothing to do with Mars and Martians. So Matthias is actually the human equivalent of Kuato in the original, and of course, Kuato in the original was a mutant. If you don't have Matthias being a mutant, well, he's pretty much 20 times less interesting. And that's really unfortunate because now we're in the third act of the film. Now, after all these weak characters, there is a shining light, and that is Laurie, played by Kate Beckinsale. And every time she's on screen, she shines because not only is she vicious, but the movie actually focused a lot on her. And I don't know if this really hurt the movie or made the movie better, but it really made her dominate the scene in every aspect, whether it be her physical abilities or just her very presence. Whether she's walking down a hallway or interrogating a citizen or just holding a gun, she just owns. And of course, this all comes from her experience as a leading lady in those underworld movies. And not to mention that this movie is directed by her husband, so I think that might be the reason why she has almost the equivalent amount of screen time as Colin Farrell. And you know, speaking of weak characters, let me tell you about another bunch of weak characters, and that is the soldiers and the robots that are chasing Douglas Quaid. These guys are pathetic. They cannot get a single shot off even though there are 20 of them surrounding them. They just can't do anything, and you always see them come in large numbers, but they just can't seem to hit the target. So those guys were pretty pathetic. Now, the main thing about the movie that made it suffer was really the story. And everybody knows that the finale will be the lasting impression on our minds as we decide on whether this movie is great or fail. The third act of the film is where the movie slows down and just falls apart. The original has a very progressive story. We keep on learning more and more and more about the story as it develops towards the third and final act. And that's when it becomes the most interesting because we see the final payoff. However, in the remake, you got an awesome first and second act, and then it just goes downhill. And this really just happens when they introduce the character of Matthias, and that's when they try to put in this exposition, but it really slows down the story because it's not nearly as interesting as what they revealed in the original. Let's just say that in the original, the finale blew your mind, and it didn't need a major action sequence to do that. It was just a concept, it just blew your mind. However, in the third act, the writing just got lazy and the movie just completely fell apart. And that is really unfortunate because they already had something very unique to work with from the very beginning, and they also made something unique by changing the story setting a little bit, and it makes us, as fans of the original, want to see where they're going with it. However, in the third act, it goes nowhere. I do have to commend this movie for its action and its visuals. It kept us all very entertained in the first and second act, and also Len Wiseman's direction for directing his wife, making her look totally badass in every single scene that she's in. And also I like that they paid homage to the original film by putting in little scenes which were pretty much the updated equivalent of the original. 6.5 out of 10. It gets a 5 for entertainment value and a 1.5 for some really cool action sequences and some great visual effects. Not nearly as good as the original, but I'd say check it out if you're curious. And that's all I have to say for Total Recall, the remake. What do you think about this movie? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed this review, hit that like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, like me on Facebook, The Ragin Nation, and also follow me on Twitter at Ragin Nation. My name is Alex Yu, and thanks for watching the Ragin Ronin review. I'll see you next time. Peace. As possible, but she added more to it, and a huge part of that has to do with that her personal story was a lot more mysterious. Michelle Pfeiffer's version